Abandoned as a child, a mountain boy and his dog turn a broken mountain cabin into a paradise. Fog clings to the ridge, like a held breath, as 12-year-old Elias Carter steps into the doorway of the ruined cabin. Rusty limping at his heel, scarred paw whispering against wet leaves. The place looks dead, sagging roof, ribbed glass, mouse-gnawed rafters. Yet something watches. On the doorframe beneath a skin of lichen, Elias finds shallow knife marks, 4 straight cuts, then a diagonal slash. Someone's tally, recent. He presses his palm to the wood and feels a faint vibration, like a secret trying to speak. Rusty stiffens, ears high, a low rumble rising in his chest. 3 years ago, a man handed Elias a wrinkled tan and said, The bill still rides in a tin under his coat, its corners soft from counting. Now, as drizzle thickens, Elias pries up a warped plank near the hearth. Underneath lies a waxed paper bundle tied with fishing line. Inside, a Polaroid, edges curled, showing the same cabin under a bright autumn sky. On the porch stands a younger man, with a crooked grin, and a small boy with wind-blown hair, clutching a red can. On the back, in blunt pencil, "Bring him here when it's time." The date. The same week, Elias was left at the pump. From the tree line an engine coughs, stalls, coughs again, too close for coincidence, then dies. Rusty points, nose slicing the mist, then whips back toward the hearth, pawing frantically at a dark seam in the stones. Elias brushes away ash, and feels iron, a ring sunk into mortar, a hidden hatch, the marks on the door, the photo. When it's time, whose plan, whose promise? A gust rattles the glass. Somewhere below the floor, something knocks once measured. Deliberate. Elias sets his jaw, threads the ring with his fingers, and what he finds beneath will change the mountain, and everything he believes about why he was abandoned. Got it. Hi. Here's your section 2 setup, in one clean flow. Deep, cinematic, zero fluff, strong curiosity. Consistent characters, no headings, no gaps. Polished grammar. Dawn thins above the highway, as Elias Carter slips away from the gas station, before anyone can shape a question he cannot bear. The wrinkled $10 bill pressed flat in a small tin against his ribs, and Rusty trotting close, the hound's scarred paw whispering through wet grass. He follows the ditch until truck noise dulls behind sumac, and enters trees that smell of rain and iron, learning with each step that distance and cover are different kinds of safety. Memory keeps pace. His father's hand on his shoulder felt heavy, but borrowed. The grin cracked at the edges, and the words soon sounded like a key that never turned. Rain stippled the concrete. The television murmured above racks of maps and jerky. The clerk read out a number and Elias shook his head, because refusal was the only power left. Rusty stepped from behind the pallets, ribs narrow, gaze bright, took half a biscuit and chose to follow. That decision felt like luck he had to honor. They learn edges first, because edges keep what centers throw away. Behind a bakery door rest loaves a shade too dark. Behind a grocery, a bin nobody watches from midnight to 3, gathers softened apples and dented cans. Elias studies shift changes, smoke breaks, and blind spots, and moans through the alleys like fog, a figure whose shadow hushes. He takes little, leaves quicker, and lets guilt evaporate with distance, because staying alive is not theft. It is proof. The 10 remains unspent, a private pledge he refuses to break. He buys only one thing, a pocket knife with a plain handle, and a blade that snaps open with the sound of decision, paid for with coins scavenged from a couch left on a curb. The knife changes his mouth. He shaves tinder, cuts vine, pries lids, strikes sparks from steel, and twists 2 stalks into cordage for a sling. Into it he drops wire ends, a hose clamp, 2 bolts that nearly match, a strip of leather, 3 pallet nails, and a jar lid to shelter embers. He drinks from fast water, watches for oil sheen, and learns that streams tell the truth if you look long enough. The Appalachians answer with rules, not mercy. Ridges rise like sleeping backs under milk-white cloud. Sweet fern paints his sleeves with resin. Ledges keep their counsel. Trails fade and return as if asking whether he deserves another chance. Rusty's nose becomes a compass, steering toward seeps and away from dens that smell of teeth. They avoid houses, because roofs mean owners, and owners mean questions he cannot answer. Sleep happens in culverts, leaf beds, and under windfalls that creak like old ships. He maps landmarks inside his head, the lightning-scored poplar, the bend where trout turn like knives under shadow, the broad stone that throws back heat at dusk. One afternoon he misjudges a bank, and skids into a stream that looks shallow until cold climbs his bones. He scrambles out, bites a laugh in half because laughter carries, and watches Rusty shake grit in a glittering fan. He wrings his sleeves, tries a spark, watches it die in wet fiber, and accepts a clear lesson: save effort for conditions that can answer. Hunger scrapes his stomach. He shares the last crust with Rusty, and walks until the shiver leaves. The discovery comes because Rusty stops. The hound freezes, nose testing the wind that smells like iron and age. Beneath white pines, a corner beam surfaces from needles, gray grain raised by weather, and a ribbon of stacked stone outlines a narrow rectangle. A doorway tilts under a crooked lint. Fog inhabits the clearing, as if it pays rent. Elias brushes the threshold clean, and feels recognition thud through him, not because he knows the place, but because purpose does. A structure means direction. Work can be arranged around a roof, even a broken one. He reads the clearing before crossing it. No fresh boot prints. Raccoon pads scribble loops by the step. A deer rubbed a sapling into shine at the corner. No cigarette ends. No feed sacks. No human leavings. He knocks once. Only the hinge complains. Inside, boards near the entry have been chewed by rot into crescents. Soft where rain found a path. He spreads his weight and moves like a careful idea. A rusted iron stove slumps in one corner, door warped and tied with wire by some previous hand. A stool without a seat lies near the wall. In a shelf's back shadow rests a single unbroken lantern, dry as if the room protected one thing only. He inventories without sentiment. 2 chair frames that can brace a wall, a broom handle sturdy enough for a dowel, a coil of fence wire, a jar half full of nails, fogged by humidity, and one hinge that still intends to work. He squares the door with shims split from a board, props the weak corner with flat stones, and sketches a plan to sister a joist. Once he finds straighter timber, he builds his first fire and fails complete. The cone hisses, smoke slicks the air and stings his eyes, tears cut tracks through ash, and anger rises because sight is a tool and tools are precious. He reworks the shape, alters the angle of air, shields tinder from gusts, breathes steady, and still the little flame gutters. Rusty watches with patient authority, chin on paws, coaching without words. Elias does not curse the room. He lets frustration stand beside him, then waits for the weather to blink first. Light returns with thinner rain. He digs punk wood from a fallen oak, shaves curls into a nest that welcomes an ember, and persuades the lighter to cooperate. Red becomes orange. Orange explores a twig. Heat dries his cuffs. Warmth arrives as steadiness rather than triumph. He straightens bent nails on a flat stone and returns them to useful lives, then cuts a panel of crusted flashing, and pins it over a seam where wind sneaks. The wall's voice lower. He scrapes rust from the stove, ties the hinge with wire, so it closes truer, and coaxes breath through the belly of iron, until heat answers. Between tasks, memory runs parallel. Sound did not become shelter at the pumps, but choice can become structure. He draws a map on a torn flyer with a charred stick and marks creek, ridge, fern bank, bolt stump, and this cabin on the misty ridge. He writes keep beside the rectangle, and underlines it. The word means labor, not ownership. It means showing up tomorrow, regardless of the weather, and the next day, and the next. Hunger returns like a tide. He forages with respect. Rusty noses swirl under a rock lip. The bright sour clears fear from his mouth. Watercress fans in a run where current chatter. Jewelweed waits for burns and stings. Plantain for poultice. Yarrow for cuts that might go wrong. He drinks from fast water and says thank you out loud because saying it keeps him honest about love. He sets 2 simple snares the way he remembers from a waiting room book, then chooses not to depend on traps that can teach cruelty. He will try fishing again when the stream falls. Twilight brings a softer wind. He packs moss and mud into gaps along the sill, and hears the cabin's tone deepen as leaks close. Socks steam against the warmed stove plate. He unfolds the 10, checks its corners, and slides it back. Keeping it whole has become a covenant. He will not let another person's promise define his next hour. Rusty sets a paw on his boot and sighs, the gesture saying what language cannot cleanly hold together. Night settle. Down valley, an engine coughs, stalls and dies, and he files the sound on the map behind his eyes with water sources and deer paths. Fog laces the pines into brush strokes. Shadows find their places and Elias listens to the chain of days, the station, the ditch, the edges, the first theft, the knife, the failure, the ember, the patch, the word keep, and feels the hole left by abandonment, except form. The boy who waited under fluorescent glare becomes the boy who works in fog and firelight. If you have ever stood beneath a blank sky and still made something, his journey asks a quiet accounting. Remember the hour you felt left and still reached for a tool, a hand, a plan. Remember how small victories altered gravity. Look at a child in a hound on a misty ridge, sealing wind and inventing safety, and name the strength that rose when nobody came. Carry that strength forward with them into tomorrow's work, because the work is how a ruined place begins to answer back. Spring rises green and wet, and Elias Carter meets it with a thin belly, a steadier knife, and Rusty's amber eyes reading the wind. Hunger ticks under every step, so he turns fear into tasks. He gathers twigs from the dry undersides of hemlocks, sorts them by thickness, and tucks punkwood into a jar lid. Rusty pauses at a patch of glossy leaves. Elias bruises one between finger and thumb. Wintergreen answers with a clean medicinal breath. He chews a sliver, not a meal, letting the taste stand in for comfort, while his eyes keep searching the ground for clues that might keep them alive. He builds a vocabulary for green. Watercress writes silver, where a seep braids through moss. Ramps hide under last year's quilt of leaves. Violet flowers offer tenderness on the day that withholds. Plantain waits to press against bites and scrapes. He tests, smells, and cross-checks, refusing to guess twice in a row. Rusty watches with a hunter's patience, treating uncertainty with silence instead of complaint. By a tumble of stones, burdock rosettes crouch low. Good only while young, they taste of earth and persistence, which suits him. Fish would be proof. The shed behind the cabin yields a warped ash pole, a coffee can of braided line, and a fist of bent nails. From the wire he coaxes 2 hesitant hooks, shaped against a stone, and kissed straight with the hammer found beneath a tarp. A pull tab becomes a spinner after the patient scrapes on a flat rock. He ties knots fat and sure, refusing to rush the one part that keeps hope attached. Rusty sits like a magistrate on a stump, approving nothing but effort while the boy rehearses the motion until it feels honest. At the creek he chooses a seam where fast water surrenders to shadow. First cast, hope. Second, ambition. Third, humility. He snags an invisible branch and wades in to free it, laughing once to sand down pride. The next step slides. Algae lifts under his boot, and the current takes him to the ribs. Cold closes like a fist. He claws to a rock, coughs hard, and hears Rusty's bark cut the rush like a whistle. On shore he wrings his overshirt until water ropes away, and sets it on a limb, accepting the lesson without excuse. He builds a fire on a flat shelf, sticks shaved to feathers, and a bark chimney, coaxing smoke into flame. He warms his hands just close enough to borrow heat, without stealing from the fragile climb. When numbness loosens, he tries again. Now the lure belongs to the current, not the argument. 10 quiet minutes later, a trout flashes, silver and rain, and he brings it to a wet palm without drama. Enough, he decides. One fish will do. He saves hunger for tomorrow's drive, and walks home damp but steadier, the day's rule stitched into memory. Afternoon sours. The ridge shoulders a sky like pewter, and wind folds the pines into dark core. Rain begins as a rehearsal, and turns into a performance between breaths. Rusty tilts once toward the west and runs, choosing not a path but a direction he trusts. Elias follows as water stitches the ferns flat, The track unthreads into slick stone, and breath becomes counting. At a cliff face, a black mouth waits, dry enough to qualify as shelter. Lightning writes bones across the forest while the storm learns its own name. Night arrives hard, thunder walks the ridges like a sheriff, and the creek forgets its polite language. Water climbs toward their old bedsite near the porch. In white flashes, he watches it advance and revises his map forever. Rusty presses close, trembling once, then steady, anchoring them to now. Elias whispers the thing he hates to name. I'm scared of failing you. The cave keeps its voice and does not judge. He feeds the flame only when it slumps and walls it with stones that do not roll. When the storm breaks, it limps, then gathers itself, then finally gives up. Morning is a sheet rinsed clean. Mud glazes the clearing, and the fire pit sulks full of silt. Work begins where excuses usually live. He bails the pit with a cut jug, drags leaf mats from the doorway, and strings lines under the eave to dry blanket. The shed's door, which yesterday barely remembered its purpose, holds truer after he resets the hinge with 2 salvaged screws. Inside he inventories 4 planks, a coil of fence wire, a coffee can of nails he can straighten, and the hammer that already fits his hand. He patches what wind finds first, a gap between wallboards, accepts a batten floated over the seam. 3 corrected nails go in clean, the hammer's tempo finding a human meter against the mountain's slow percussion. He shims a tilting sill with wedges shaved from scrap, and hears the cabin drop its creak from warning to memory. Clay and straw seal the pipe collar, so smoke goes where it should. 2 flat rocks at the threshold lift boots out of. Rusty patrols the perimeter like a veteran and grants squirrels a stay of sentence. Afternoons are split between work and food. He sets 2 snares only where prints repeat, promising himself he will never lay more than need require. He braids cordage from inner bark, thumbs learning patience from stubborn fibers. He polishes the lantern's chimney with vinegar and ash until the glass remembers clarity, then tests the wick with a thumb of oil pinched from an old can. He planes the swollen door edge until the latch catches without pleading. Each success stacks inside him like timbers, stabilizing the many rooms of his resolve. When the rain yields, and the sky turns porcelain, he returns to the creek with calmer breath. The cast behave. The line lies where the current loosens. A fish accepts the lie and becomes dinner. He salts a strip thin, sears it on the stove's plate, after reseating the hinge with wire, and shares the crisp skin with Rusty, who takes it delicately, as if ceremony protects life. He marks a future garden with a stake line, though soil still keeps its cold secret. The vow matters more than timing. The ground has heard him. Dusk finds him on the stoop, hands raw, eyes clear. The room behind him no longer sounds afraid of the night. The map on a torn flyer grows denser. Cave seep, trout seam, safe deadfall way around the washout. He touches the $10 bill in its tin, and understands it as a relic, instead of a sentence. Rusty leans against his knee and sighs the long sigh of animals who believe. If a challenge once stood before you, big as weather and loud as doubt, remember the minute you answered anyway. Carry that steadiness forward. Let it guide you, as this boy and his dog learn to turn survival into strength. Think back to the day you were soaked to the bone by circumstance, and still lit a flame. Remember how your hands learned a new motion, how doubt thinned, how breath evened. Hold that scene beside Elias tonight, and choose your next small stubborn step forward. Do it again. Snow arrives like a law, smothering the ridge until the cabin looks carved from chalk. Elias wakes to frost on the window, and a roofline softened into one white fold, 13 by his notch marks. He moves with winter's grammar, slow, deliberate, exact. Rusty noses the door seam, sneezes once, and leans against his calf, as if measuring the day's resolve. Elias banks the coals, coaxes flame with feathered shavings, and promises to work. The stove is a stubborn elder that respects effort more than pleading. The hinge sags, and smoke leaks at the warp. Elias twists new wire through the eye, anchors it against a flattened nail, and smears deer fat along the edge, so air will seal where iron argues. He shaves kindling from dry hardwood, shelters a nest with a baffle cut from flashing, and waits for the ember to become heat. When it lifts, the room exhales. A thin sound leaves the boards, replaced by quiet air. Wood becomes currency. He stacked cords under the eave, and another cache beneath a spruce. But snow taxes the stack. Each morning the pile looks smaller, as if night charges interest. He knocks ice from bark, line splits by the wall to dry, and keeps moving. Rusty drags smaller limbs, tail flagging. Sun climbs a finger's width, and vanishes. Food shrinks faster than fuel. Storms erase tracks, and snares go quiet. Rusty corrects the deficit. At first light, the hound ranges, chest plowing dust snow, returning with whiskers frosted and a rabbit in his jaw. Elias kneels, thanks him aloud, and dresses the catch, saving liver and hide for later. He renders fat for lamp and hinge, stretches skins on a frame, and sets bones aside for broth. Smoking becomes an apprenticeship. He rigs a low fire that thinks in coals, and hangs thin strips on a green stick rack inside a sleeve. Birch bark bites bitter, applewood smokes sweeter. He salts the meat with the last of his grains, presses it between boards, and checks hourly. The cabin smells of patience. Rusty watches without begging, content to guard what they have made. Storms stack into white walls, drifts butt the north side, and invent a windless hallway where there was only air. Elias packs snow against the sill, then kneads mud from a bucket banked before freeze, chopping straw into it for strength. He tests seams with a bare wrist until only whispers remain. At night, the patched stove holds its line, heat steady. Rule: fix small things before they grow. Water must still move. The creek keeps its silver beneath glass. On a blue noon after days of confinement, he straps a rope about his chest, tells Rusty to stay, and steps onto a slick shelf near a gentle bend. Belief outweighs caution. The ice sighs and breaks. Winter takes him whole. Cold erases language. He rams upward, misses, tries again, finds the edge and stalls. Chest sawing air. Rusty barks once and braces, rope tight across his shoulders. The dog's pull turns panic into orders that make sense. Elias kicks, rolls, crawls flat, and lets the line guide him. On shore he sheds layers, wrings them, hangs them near the stove, and rubs his skin warm. Hot water, then broth, then rest. The shiver loosens its teeth. When thought comes back, it carries humility. He inks the torn map with a black cross by the bend, and writes never again without a line. The near loss becomes a tool. He will not repeat the lesson. He carves oak cleats, lashes them with leather, bends a nail and a spoon into a gaff, and tests the creek belly down. Tied off, gaff ready. The ice sings hollow. He listens and leaves, proof that caution is a skill, not a move. Rusty returns to practical work, checking snares, reading the wind, patrolling the line where forest and clearing negotiate. Winter keeps asking. They answer with preparation. The map evolves from sketch to treat. He marks dead ash that splits easily, a dry-hearted beach, the grove mice favor, the snag where a hawk posts. He maps danger with the same ink, the drift that hides a hole, the slope that avalanches under crust, the place sun blesses by noon and abandons by 3. Knowledge becomes portable heat. Days settle into rituals that hold. He wakes, banks fire, feeds Rusty, reads the sky. He walks the woodline with a sled of saplings and an old doorskin, hauls what the forest offers and resists asking for more. He melts snow and keeps it just below a simmer to save fuel. He patches socks with teased thread, wraps the axe haft with leather, and sets tools where hands find them. Food becomes math with mercy. He cuts smoked meat into thin squares and tucks them into a jar sealed with paper. He eats them like punctuation, not paragraph. On days Rusty brings nothing, he dips into the reserve without shame. Hoarding pride is costly. Hunger is honest. One afternoon he unearths a cache under packed snow, 3 wrinkled carrots from autumn, and feels like a kinder month mailed a note. He grates one into a pot with broth, and a pine needle pinch for lift. Fatigue drags carelessness through the door, so he pushes back with work that shows. He carves a small Rusty from a maple knot, finding the ear with a patient blade, the tilt of attention in the neck, the forepaws crow. He braids a mat from rope scraps to discipline muddy boots. He stitches a mitten from a felted sleeve, and imagines trading its mate someday for matches. Making real things builds a wall against the dark. Night lengthens but softens. He reads the stove by sound, and adjusts the air like a friend's blanket. Snow slides from the eaves in soft sighs that announce the roof shedding weight. He tells himself shorter stories that extend the future. He thanks Rusty again for the creek, and scratches the dog's chest while heat blooms under his palm. Their bond becomes craft. Watch, warn, share, rest. The room becomes a workshop. By late winter the cabin smells of clean smoke, rabbit, leather and wood. The walls no longer whisper cold through their seams. The stove wears its wire like proof, and its fat sealed edge like memory. The map, dense with notes, records places and lessons learned. Outside, snow rules. Inside, warmth argues that survival can include comfort without softening willpower. Elias counts wood with an honest eye, meals without fear, and days without resentment. Rusty sleeps close, ears flicking. If you have stood inside a season that asked everything, and then added a tax, remember the choice that kept you moving forward. Recall the hour you turned error into a tool, cold into a teacher, and fear into a rule that saved you. Hold that memory beside this boy and his dog as they share heat and quiet. Let it remind you that strength is not loud. It is a steady rope, breath given back to a fire, a map revised after a fall, and a friend who will not let go until you stand. Keep going, one careful step forward. Spring loosens its grip, and the ridge exhales a damp sweetness that tells Elias Carter he has outlasted another winter and earned the right to learn finer work. 14 now, lean and steady, he crosses the clearing with Rusty pacing beside him. The hound's scarred paw a quiet metronome on thawed duff. The lean-to behind the cabin, more complaint than shelter, shudders when a gust slaps its crooked door wide. In the shadowed corner, under a rotten tarp and a drift of mouse-nibbled burlap, his fingers close on a rusted metal handle. He heaves, grit rasping his knuckles, and drags a long, low box into the light. The lid gives after 2 patients. Inside, a hand saw with fine teeth, a square, a brace and bit, a pair of pliers with a stubborn hinge, a flat file worn smooth at the handle, a tin of mixed nails still loyal to their purpose. The box smells of iron and old oil, the way a workshop remembers the hands that made it live. Elias kneels as if at a small altar. Rusty tilts his head, amber eyes bright. Tools are more than objects, they are sentences that let a person speak clearly to wood and time. He knows it the same way he knows which cloud will keep its promise. He cleans each piece like he is polishing a memory he wants to carry forward. Oil loosens the pliers. The brace turns in his palm. With a dry hymn, the saw drinks a narrow line of oil along its spine and blinks awake. He sharpens the teeth with quiet focus, one measured stroke per point, refusing to rush the first partnership that might change everything. When he lifts the square, the weight in his hand feels like a rulebook written in steel. With a straight edge and right angles, guesswork becomes before noon, he proves it. Along the back wall, a sill that rot chewed soft accepts a clean line scored with the square's tip. The saw bites true and sings metal over grain. Curls of pale wood lift and fall, neat as breath. He pares to firm fibers, tests with a thumb, and secures the beam with a straight plank salvaged from a fallen fence. He pre-drills holes so splits cannot bloom, and taps nails home until the hammer's cadence turns into a calm conversation with the cabin. Where the corner once sagged, the wall now stands with a quieter spine. The building seems to draw a deeper breath. With the pliers he bends fence wire into tidy hangers, mounts a gutter along the south eave with scavenged screws, and sets an old nail barrel on stones to turn gravity into a friend. He screens the downspout, and ties a flap to flush grit at the start of storms, then threads a bent brass fitting through a hole near the base to make a spigot. Rain, when it comes, will keep a promise in wood and metal rather than in hope alone. He steps back and studies the line of gutter, the angle of fall, the barrel's stance. Every choice feels like a sentence that needs only clarity, not volume. Old seeds wait in a tin he found last summer behind a drawer. Beans, corn, 2 paper packets labeled squash in a faded hand, and a cloth twist of lettuce rattling like a private wit. He forks a patch along the southern edge, breaks clods until they sigh back into soil, and works leaf mold under each row, so roots will find comfort where hunger once ruled. He lays small windbreaks from peeled logs, snaps chalk line straightness with string and stake, and plants with fen and silence, covering each kernel with the care of a secret. The fence woven from saplings and wire keeps deer honest and rabbits uncertain. Rusty patrols the line, tail flagging, nose busy, claiming the perimeter with quiet attention. Repairs that once leaned on luck now carry the dignity of fit. He recuts a window stop so the sash closes without pleading, planes a door edge until the latch kisses home, and collars the stovepipe with a drilled strap so smoke obeys its lane. The brace hums as he bores pilots. The square corrects appetite when haste tempts his hand. He learns the beauty of what nobody sees, a joist seated flush, a seam that no longer whispers, a hinge that swings and forgets to announce itself. The cabin's voice drops from anxious creak to settled murmur, and the air inside warms faster, stays kinder. Rusty's work sharpens alongside his own. At first light, the hound ranges and returns with quail, later with rabbit, later still with only the story of a fox he chose not to follow. The scar on his paw reads like a solved riddle rather than a wound. Elias thanks him with eye contact and a careful share, because partnership deserves ceremony. On lean days, they split trout and cornbread baked from traded meal. On good days, Rusty accepts his portion with the dignity of a worker paid in full. Together, they move like a small, competent crew. The first storm after the gutter goes in feels like a test he has studied to pass. Rain drums a clean tattoo across the eave. The rinse flap falls. The screen traps grit, and the barrel fills with a sound like a throat clearing to speak plain truth. He links a second cask with a hose so the overflow becomes stored time. When he lifts the lid and sees a dark oval holding a fragment of sky, relief sits down in his bone. Now he can wash greens without stealing from the creek, simmer beans long enough to soften pride, and bathe without turning hygiene into theft. Clean water nearby feels like permission to think about comfort, not just survival. His body hardens to the work, but not toward anger. Calluses cross his palms like old river maps. Forearms rope and settle. Breath becomes a modest companion, yet something softens too. Between tasks, he carves a small rusty from a forked maple knot, letting grains suggest muscle, finding the ears tilt in the calm focus in the eyes with a thin knife and patient thumb. He oils the figure and sets it on the windowsill to guard the guard. When light touches the carving, and it seems to look back with quiet loyalty, he understands that strength and tenderness do not cancel, they braid. Inside, he builds an order that makes labor faster. A shelf above the stove holds jars by use rather than pegs near the door sort tools by purpose. The saw rests on a pair with leather guards to honor its teeth. He lays a plank floor over cross battens in the corner where he reads on wet evenings, stitches a canvas nail sack so his fingers no longer bleed on coffee can rims, and planes a board into a table that doesn't wobble. On the underside he burns a shy maker's mark, a crooked C that means carter's work, and more quietly, I will keep this place. The garden teaches patience that muscles cannot. He thinks lettuce, though the act feels cruel, trusting space as a kind of kindness. He stakes beans and coaxes their willing spirals upward. He watches corn blades turn their faces as one when the wind shifts and begins to understand how a field reads the weather. He pinches the first squash blossom, memorizes its color, and smiles when bees find the later flowers without being asked. Sprouts write green script across dark soil. He reads every line with gratitude. Trade day changes because he carries certainty not need. Amos Reed weighs a tight-jointed frame, and nods without commentary. Lena, the herbalist, chooses spoons shaped for tired hands and slips him a sprig of thyme with instructions to plant it where he will brush it daily. He trades for salt, a fresh file, and seed packets that feel like spells. Pole bean, Cherokee tan, Brandywine. He tucks them under his shirt for the walk home as if carrying letters he means to answer with work. Back at the door he plants the thyme where morning light blesses it, and its scent rewrites the air. Yeah. Meals not yet cooked, comfort not yet spent. The rain catch taps its steady metronome while Cloud shoulders the He straightens 2 nails for the sill, and drives them home. He strings a cord from peg to peg, and tucks onions there to dry. He builds a low bench facing the creek, and sits with Rusty to admire a rectangle of turned soil that now belongs to effort rather than The cabin no longer looks like a rescued ruin. It looks like a place where you would choose to live. In the small hours, wind fusses at the eaves. Elias studies the wooden Rusty by lamplight and feels his chest loose. The carving cannot hunt or warn, yet it holds a truth about loyalty the way a good joint holds weight. Quietly, completely, he rubs the figure with oil, until it fits his palm like a promise. He forgives the younger boy who waited too long at the pumps, and thanks the present one who learned how to speak to wood, water and weather with the right words in iron and patience. If you have ever found a tool, a habit, a friend, or a moment of clear instruction that turned your life by a few honest degrees, hold it beside him now. Remember the first true fit, that ended a long rattle, the cut that replaced guessing, the plan that made tomorrow easier than yesterday. Let that memory steady your breath, the way Rusty steadies his, and then pick up the best tool within reach, courage, attention, a saw with honest teeth, and make one exact improvement that points your days toward home. A dry wind combs the ridge at dawn and sets the pines whispering. 15 now. Taller in the doorway, Elias Carter smells smoke that does not belong to his stove. Rusty halts, head canted, scarred paw firm, nose threading the air. The mountain has held its breath for weeks now. It exhales. Now he moves before fear writes orders. The rain barrels hold spring's savings. He dips a bucket, sloshes cold water onto shingles, then pushes wet rags into the gutters. Rusty watches and keeps close, as another bucket, and another, turn the roof from tinder into armor. The sound starts as far freight and grows, until it fills the draws with furnace hum. Wind swings from the west, and shoves breath across the clearing. Elias sets a plan bigger than fear. Cut a break to mineral, clear brush, move fuel so flame must argue with dirt. He shoulders the saw, takes the grubbing hoe, and chooses a circle wider than reason. They begin at the downhill edge, where embers will roll. Elias scrapes to bare earth, breaking roots, flipping sod, tossing stones with hands already raw. Rusty drags branches backward, tail low, resin flashes under the saw. Red dust paints his forearms while sweat burns his eyes. He adjusts, widens the belt, and turns the brush into a path that cannot feed a torch. The first flame appears in the fern brake and becomes a sheet between blinks. It runs the grass, leaps over shrubs, and climbs into low boughs that crackle. Sound deepens into a roar that fills his ribs until his heartbeat has to push back to be heard. He presses his clothes flat, leaves curl where no flame has touched them. Rusty barks once and resets focus. Elias knots a bandana and tastes salt and soot. He cuts a second belt tighter, marked with stones hauled in calmer seasons. Ash thickens. Light turns copper. A spark lands on the stoop. He smothers it and understands how many more could fall. He drenches the sill and boards. He says, steady as a plumb line, "We're staying." Rusty wedges a limb free from the fence and tows it out of the arc. Heat builds like a wall that walks. Flame crowns a fir, ladders with a rush that makes his stomach buck. He nearly runs. The road downhill is a gray vein. The creek beyond glitters in the mind. He would live if he fled, arriving intact and hollow. The room, the table, the map, the carving, the barrels, the beans and corn, everything that turned shelter into home, would crumple like paper. Choice redraws him. He digs faster, not wild, but exact, scraping to stone, flipping mats, burying dry under damp. A root refuses. He curses once, then severs it with 2 strokes. Rusty hauls brush to the ash scar that cannot reignite, and returns for more. Elias douses the roof again. The ladder thumps the eave. Water runs in dark stripes that please more than any song. The garden hisses before it burns. Leaves blacken in a wave. Squash collapse into sugar smoke. Bean poles flare like matchsticks. He tells the soil without words that they will start again. He yanks the trellis and throws it onto the emptied zone where flame has nothing to eat. Embers whirl. A nest forms under the porch rail. He stamps until the glow goes black. Another nest drops onto the woodpile and shivers back. He yanks splits into the break and stomps the last orange flat. Rusty snaps at a coal, then returns to dragging limbs. Together, They erase chances. Wind slants sideways. It shoves flame toward the smokehouse frame, in a stack of shingles meant for autumn. Elias counters by scraping a trench that angles heat away, then lights a thin backburn along fresh dirt, letting a disciplined line eat toward the front. Fire meets fire and starves. He widens the ring, checks the roof, pours another bucket down the ridge, and drinks one dip. The worst hour arrives as a wall shoving through the lower slope. Trunks become torches. Sparks wheel high, and fall like hot rain. The roar is a choir of engines. He thinks about leaving again. He does not. He trusts the geometry carved into dirt, and the wet shield above their head. He kneels where the brake kisses rock, and scrapes with fingers because the hoe cannot find the angle. A gust sends a tongue across the line toward the sill. He drops flat, and slaps it with a wet burlap pad, until it gutters. Smoke closes. He and Rusty vanish in their clearing, then reappear when a push of wind lifts the veil. Elias works by habit, not hope. Rake, scrape, throw, stamp, soak, check, repeat. Rusty coughs, drinks, shakes, and goes again. They keep their side clean until the tide spends itself on rock and damp. The surge passes. The roar lowers to a growl. Smoke thins, until light remembers gold. Blackened stems hiss, then collapse. Elias walks the line and finds coals pretending to sleep. He needles them apart with a green stick, until they die small death. Rusty limps once, licks the scarred paw, then leans against his shin. Silence after fire is not absence. It is inventory. The garden lies flattened. Geometry turned to soot and perfume. Barrel lids are singed but half the fence is a cinder sketch. He cuts the angry sections away, and leaves what can stand. The cabin wears streaks of ash, and a skin of damp. The boards are hot but alive. He lays his palm on the wall and feels warmth that intends to stay. Dusk makes a case for rest. He sits on the step with Rusty's head, heavy in his lap, and watches cinders pulse along the ridge, like tired stars. His hands shake, then do not. He hangs the pads to dry, drains one last dipper across the gutter to refresh the damp, and circles the belts once more. By the time he returns, night is honest. Inside, the room smells of wet timber, smoke, iron, and relief. He washes his face and feels grit leave his skin. He warms what was saved from yesterday, eating slowly to teach his body that danger has passed. When he looks at the small carving of Rusty on the sill, the figure seems to stand taller. He touches the oiled wood, and says, "We kept it." Rusty's ears flick once. He marks the map, a double line around the cabin, and the word firebreak. He draws an X over the garden, and beside it a promise. Tomorrow they will rake ash, wet the soil, and rebuild. Tonight they will sleep where the roof still holds, under boards black at the edges, and faithful at the center. If a day has stood over you with flame and told you to abandon what you love, remember this circle of scraped earth, this wet roof, this boy who almost ran, and then stayed. Remember how staying turned fear into exact motions that changed and ended. Let that memory hand you water, hand you a tool, hand you resolve. Take it, hold it, stand where you must, guard what you have built. When the front passes, walk your line, until the last coal dies, and the future can root again. At 16, Elias Carter measures mornings by the barrel's soft slosh, and Rusty's tail tapping the door. Firebreak and garden have healed. The cabin wears soot like a medal, yet salt, matches, needles, and a new file do not grow on a ridge. So he chooses a gray, windless day and heads for the trading post Rusty scented months ago. He packs carvings in an oilcloth roll, spoons rubbed with walnut, a square frame joined tight, tongs with honest bite, and a small wooden hound with a respectful tilt of earlocks the door, pats the barrel lid, and takes the concealed route he practiced during storms. Travel is subtraction. He removes noise, avoids tracks, stays below skylines, crosses clearings at angles, and keeps the sun where it helps rather than tattles. Rusty scouts, pauses at forks, and waits for a nod. By noon, the path spills into a valley where talk pools around a low building with reeds painted in tired letters. Barrels, bridles, and crates sit like punctuation. Engines mutter, a bell rings, and voices trade weather, prices, and names that mean kin. He lingers at the edge, then steps inside. The counter is smooth at the elbows and nicked where hard stories turned. Amos Reed stands behind it, beard the color of twine, eyes river blue, posture untroubled by hurry. "Work to show?" he asks, tone plain as a carpenter's pencil. Elias unrolls the oilcloth. Wood speaks. Amos turns the frame, checks it for square, taps joints with a knuckle, and lets a corner of his mouth rise. He tests the tongs, sights a spoon's curve and sets the carved hound where sunlight finds its back. "Fair," he says. A woman with a long gray braid and a shelf of glass behind her steps near. "Lena," she offers, washing her hands in a breath of rosemary. She lifts a walnut bowl, inhales its clean oil, and smiles like someone who recognizes careful work. "Finish is kind," she says, and slides forward a jar of the green of summer creeks. "Plantain salve. Trade for the bowl." He nods. Amos measures salt into muslin, counts out 2 boxes of matches, and places a packet of needles beside a narrow file wrapped in brown. "Frame and tongs cover it," he says, then adds a coil of light wire, for the way that corner sits. Business without spectacle. Rusty drifts to a brindled dog asleep by the stove. The old hound wakes, blinks once, and stands with patient dignity. Noses touch, tails draw modest circles. Their quiet greeting softens the room. Elias keeps his story orderly and short. An uncle up the ridge, a cough that keeps him close, fences that need watching, a place that holds when wind leans hard. He does not mention birthdays, school or the tin with the wrinkled bill. Most traders prefer useful facts. Amos gathers the rest from silence. Lena talks about remedies in a tone that trusts understanding. She names comfrey and cautions its strength, shows spruce pitch for clean glue, yarrow for bleeding, skullcap for restless nights, and willow for aches. She draws leaves in a notebook and lets him copy 2 pages, when time allows, charging only a promise to build a better drying frame. Air should move like a river, not a crowd, she says. He brings a rack with sliding slats on his next visit. Pegged tight, the corners kissed true. She ties a blue thread to its corner and calls it thoughtful. Every few weeks he arrives with something honest, a stool that does not wobble, a spoon whose lip flatters soup, a lantern repair that tames a ghost draft. His pieces leave in other hands and return as salt meal, seed corn kerosene, thread, or pullets promised when fox kits fatten. A printed map over Amos's desk gains a tiny wooden pin shaped like a leaf. Lena says travelers ask about the boy who cuts joints that do not argue. Elias drinks water without looking over his shoulder, then looks anyway. Near community is not yet home, yet it hums with a safety he can hold for an hour. One blue noon, 2 men in green step through the door, badges catching light like ice. Rangers. Their boots speak boundary. Conversation flattens. The shorter gaze clicks across faces. The taller asks about the cedar, cut along the wash. Amos closes a ledger as if setting down rain. "Wind took it," he says. "Folks cleaned what fell." The short ranger's look lands on Elias. Bundle, boots, eyes and weight. "You local?" he asks. Elias borrows years from his posture. "Up the ridge," he answers, even as his heart studies exits. "My uncle keeps to himself." A beat stretches thin. The taller glances at Rusty's copper tag, the polish on a spoon, and the square shoulders behind the boy's words. "Watch your burns," he says finally. Dry season again. The door closes. Talk returns in a long breath. Rusty leans into the brindled dog. Universal. "We're fine." Amos slides a tin of grease toward Elias without naming gratitude, then turns to someone arguing about nails versus screws. Lena brushes sawdust from his sleeve. "Drink, then go," she murmurs. "If you pass Bone Set, bring 3 stems." On the walk home he revises routes and habits. He chooses a ferny swale that holds no prints, a rock ribbon that confuses scent, and a laurel tunnel the sky forgets. He caches half the matches, and a twist of salt in a cleft above the creek, marks it with 2 stones at an odd angle, and resolves never to cross open ground without a reason. He trims his story further. Uncle coughs less in bad weather. Fence held last blow. Next time bring Small consistent truths make good armor. The cabin absorbs the day like old wood taking oil. New wire becomes hooks near the stove. The salve waits on a peg by the door. The file kisses saw teeth until they sing. He plants skullcap beside time. Neighbors who nod from porches. Rusty sprawls in a sunstripe, dreams of the brindled dog, and kicks once at phantom rabbits. He adds 2 additions on the map, reeds on the valley road, and a small flower for Lena's lessons. Beneath, he writes, ask before cutting cedar. Remember, permits are a language some people speak. Visits stack into seasons. He learns which mornings bring miners, which afternoons fill with farmers, and which damp evenings call out old men who trade stories for company and buy nails to justify staying. He brings a table that will not wobble. A woman bangs her palm, laughs when nothing rattles, and pays with a jar of peach jam that tastes like July. A teenager tests a spoon and asks how to hold a knife without bleeding. Elias shows him on a scrap and leaves the practice piece. Quiet reputation gathers like moss. The close call lingers. He arrives by different paths, never carries more than he can explain, and binds his role so tools face inward, carvings outward, workmanship visible like a passport. He keeps Rusty brushed and calm. Good dogs imply good houses. Good houses imply steady people. On a rain-bright afternoon, he finds Lena sorting willow bark. She asks about sleep. He admits storms still pull him away. She brews tea with skullcap, lemon balm, and a whisper of honey, stands with him while the cup cools, and talks about breathing as craft. Count 4, pause 2, let out 6, she says. He practices that night, and dreams less of engines that cough and fade. The brindled dog begins to walk with Rusty halfway down the lane when Elias leaves, then turns back as if handing him to the trees. Once, near the bridge, a truck slows. 2 uniform caps lean out. Elias points at a blowdown and says, Uncle sent me to fetch a hinge. Amos put aside. The truck rolls on. His heart climbs down from its perch. Secrecy can be a posture rather than a story. When frost rims the time, he lifts the last beans, pockets seeds for spring, and carries a rack of spoons that reflect lamplight like quiet moon. Amos pays with lamp oil, and a tin whistle left by a traveling fiddler. Lena tucks 2 packets of echinacea into his pocket and instructs him to plant them where bees gossip. He sets the whistle on the sill at home. Rusty noses it, unimpressed. Elias laughs and lets a note rise anyway. If your life has ever delivered an ally where you expected scrutiny, hold that moment beside this boy at a counter where suspicion could have sharpened. Remember the person who placed a tool in your hand and said, try it like this. Recall the shopkeeper who vouched with a nod. Picture the dog that leaned against your leg, unasked. Carry those faces forward. Let them widen your map the way Amos and Lena widen his. Until the path between solitude and community feels like a bridge you can cross without losing yourself. At 18, Elias Carter studies law, the way he once studied weather. Patient, precise, unwilling to pretend. In a back corner of Amos Reed's store, a dog-eared handbook and county pamphlets teach him a different map, years of open use, clear boundaries, visible improvements, neighbors aware, taxes paid by the one who acted as owner. Amos slides him a sharp pencil. Write what you can prove. He memorizes the statute's bones. Continuous possession for the full period, exclusive control, visible use that would warn any owner, and good faith payment of assessed taxes each year, without fail. Lena brings tea. Label everything. He learns the language of lines. With Amos's tape and a borrowed compass, he walks the ground he already knows by breath and boot. The creek bend. The firebreak scraped to mineral. The dead ash stump he uses for sharpening. The granite ledge like a broken loaf. He marks bearings and distances, returns twice to correct small errors. He gathers proof a clerk can hold photographs in seasons. A ledger of repairs, seed and shingle receipts, trade notes signed by hands that remember frames that do not wobble, neighbors sign statements. The cattleman notes a mended fence, and a boy who returns tools clean. 2 miners vouch for a table, heavy enough to outlast arguments. Lena lists tinctures swapped for spoons and a drying rack that breathed. He prints his name, Elias James Carter, on the first form, and checks the applicant, in possession. Rusty waits outside under Lena's hand, while Elias steps into the courthouse that smells of paper and polish. The clerk's glasses make her caution bright. Forms arrive like stacked lumber. He completes each blank as though fitting dovetails. Square, patient, unwilling to smash for speed. Basis adverse possession. Evidence, photos, affidavits, maps, improvements, taxes. He pays the fee with money earned from frames and spoons, and breathes as if lifting a beam. Waiting becomes labor by another name. He scrubs thresholds, rakes paths, trims garden edges, and planes a sticking door, until the latch closes with a clean kiss. He sets photographs in a line that shows honest progression. True joists, fixed gutters, barrels linked, roof reshingled after the fire, corn greening again, lantern chimneys gleam, the stove door swings without pleading, stamped tax slips sit in a folder wrapped with twine. The sedan arrives at noon, stitched with high clouds. Two officials step out with clipboards and boots that haven't learned local mud. Rusty pads forward, tail level. One woman kneels and offers an open palm. The dog rests his head there like a verdict. Elias leads them through every room. They test windows, sight along a sill, ask about alarms, water and waste. He shows the barrel system, the screened downspout, and the overflow hose to a second cask. Beds are neat, tools sorted, floors solid. Outside he walks the firebreak, the garden rows, the small shed with a new roof. They ask about the time and place. He ties dates to events. A county can check. The storm that dropped the sycamore, the wildfire year, the deep snow, the season Lena's bees moved. They ask about taxes. He lays the stamped slips on the table. They ask about witnesses. He hands the statement. They ask about intent. He answers with one word that has guided him for years. Keep. He lets the room carry its weight. Letters measure patience. One requests a clarified boundary call. He returns with corrected bearings and the cattleman's signature. Another asks for additional photographs. He prints winter shots that show snow banked along a straight fence, and a path kept open to barrels, and a shed. Waiting feels like an extension of work. He keeps mending, planting, scraping and reading. He sets a second window in the south wall, and repairs a crate hinge for feed. The envelope arrives on a day bright enough to ring. He breaks the seal on the stoop, with Rusty's chin against his knee. By authority of county and state, the letter begins. The words step forward. Title granted to 30 acres bounded by creek, ridge, and stone. Dwelling recognized as homestead. Owner of record, Elias James Carter. He reads the name twice, and lets the page rest against his thigh while breathing. Remembering size, Rusty thumps his tail. Elias pins the notice to an inside beam, with a nail he once straightened on a rock. He looks across ground that has shifted from defense to stewardship. With the title comes a broader circle he accepts as naturally as morning. He reshingles the roof, flashings neat at valleys, cap rows aligned true. He sets real glass where plastic once was, trims new sash, and seals each pane with putty. He squares a doorway and builds a porch that faces east. He mills a sign from maple, and burns Carter's Haven across the grain, then rubs oil until the letters lift. Neighbors begin to treat the place as a landmark. A hunter brings a fawn, tangled in a fence. Elias cleans the cut with Lena's tincture, binds it with gauze, and sets the young deer in a pen with shade and water. By dusk, the breath steadies in the pen. Hope turns into a tool. The rescue grows from intention into structure. He roofs a narrow shed, strings mesh that will not cut wings, hangs perches, and builds 2 runs where deer can regain strength. He starts a ledger separate from his survey book. Date, species, cause, treatment, relief. Lena teaches dosage and warning signs. Amos brings wire. The cattleman drops salt blocks for whoever needs them. Even the rangers stop by on a lavender evening and talk water bars instead of warnings. Ask about the firebreak, and nod toward the barrel. One kneels to scratch Rusty's neck, and calls the dog a foreman. Late summer calls for patience and gentleness. An owl arrives with a bruised wing. He builds a quiet box and feeds carefully while Lena checks pupil. A fox limps through the gate at dawn. He He washes the wound and wraps lightly, then watches until the gate steadies. A snapped snare leaves a raccoon thin and wired. He keeps movement slow, then opens the pen on a clear dusk. The animal looks once and slips into the brush. Release weighs as much as rescue. On a still night, after the owl lifts clean and vanishes over the meadow, Elias sits on the porch with Rusty's head heavy against his boot, and counts the seasons that carried him from waiting to keep. The deed hangs level, the windows hold stars, the roof does not complain, the garden breathes in rectangles, water murmurs in the barrel. Tomorrow he will check a rabbit's stitches, mend the gate, sand a table for Amos, and plant If you have ever found a page, a person, a rule, or a humble tool that turned drifting into direction, hold it beside this moment, at the stoop. Remember how a signature, a lesson, or a steady hand gave you permission to keep what work had already built. Let that memory widen your breath and steady your hands. The way this boy and his dog turn a hard-won cabin into a haven that welcomes life back to itself. Keep building forward. At 21, Elias Carter stands on the porch of the cabin that once leaned like a tired animal and feels the boards answer with quiet strength. Morning climbs the ridge in a pale sweep, touching windows he set himself, shingles he laid in faithful rows, and the cedar sign waiting on its chain. Rusty rests at the top step, muzzle silvered, eyes still bright. Luna, a young collie with a white blaze like a brushstroke, patrols the herb bed, nosing time as if memorizing comfort. Beyond them, the garden gathers light, tomatoes lifting their cages like lanterns, beans handwriting along cords, corn listening to the wind. The bunkhouse door slides open, soft voices and boot scuffs drift out. Carter's haven is awake. He named it that because keeping was never just wood and roof. It was people arriving with rattled hearts and leaving with hands that could hold good weight. Teens come with counselors, cousins or alone, guided by the rumor that a boy once abandoned built a place where work turns into belonging. Elias meets each new arrival at the gate, palms open, voice steady, Rusty dignified, Luna delighted. Names first, water next, boots that fit, a walk through the garden, a bench at the shop, a job that matters right away. Stack kindling by size, sweep chips to the bin, hold a plank while a friend learns to cut true. He never asks for pain, as a ticket or for stories as a toll. Forward is the rule. By mid-morning, the workshop hums, planes nap on a shelf, a lathe waits in the corner. Bench hooks grip planks without swagger. Elias shows how to sight a line, drill a pilot, feel when grain wants patience, not force. He pairs a kid who runs hot with a quiet partner who measures twice, by habit, letting rhythm replace the old urge to bolt or break. After wood comes soil. Together they test moisture with a knuckle, plant at depth, thin without guilt, and mulch with last year's leaves. Kitchens follow. Knives move slowly and surely. Pots whisper. Bread learns to rise in a room that finally holds steady heat. Inside the bunkhouse, quilts pieced by neighbors warm the bunks. Trunks at each bed hold a notebook, a pencil, and a simple promise. Begin again here. A chalkboard lists the day. Shop, garden, clinic, supper, fire circle, so mystery loosens its grip. At the clinic shed, Lena's shelves line amber bottles and labeled jars. Her classes turn weeds into pharmacy and worry into understanding. Plantain draws, yarrow stops, willow soothes, she says, and a room full of shoulders lowers a notch, because knowledge feels like shelter. Wildlife pens sit behind the shed, each hutch tagged with date, wound, plan. A fox mends, after the wire, a raccoon gains weight and manners, an owl blinks, wing nearly sound. Teens log feedings, scrub pans, refresh water, and speak gently, because voice can be medicine. When a ranger truck grinds to the gate with a tangled fawn, the yard becomes exactly what the years prepared it to be. Steady, skilled, kind sawing, pressure, wrap, shade, quiet. The fawn's breath smooths. Rusty stations himself at the door like a herald who approves. Authority behaves like respect now. The younger ranger nods toward the rebuilt water bars along the firebreak. Good pitch, he says. A dozen eyes register possibility. where they expected judgment. The older ranger lingers by the bean trellis and asks how the soil holds moisture through dry spells. Elias explains rhythm and restraint, mulch, spacing, no heroics with the hose. People who once asked him questions he couldn't answer now ask about the craft he paid for with time. Evenings gather the day's labor and bless it. They eat outside when the weather allows, bowls balanced on knees, stew rich with beans and squash, cornbread humming from the oven. Stories rise around the fire not as confessions, but as maps, a stretch of road nobody should take alone, a teacher who guarded a spark, a neighbor who knocked at the right minute and stayed. Elias tells smaller things, the first board that finally sat flat, after a dozen crooked cousins, the hour smoke turned from enemy into signal, the morning a hawk lifted clean, because patience won. He doesn't perform the old wound. He offers the sequence that still guides him: see steady, try, fix, keep. Music finds them. Elias plays a tune on the simple whistle Amos bartered into his pocket. Mariah answers with a harmonica. Jace keeps time on a bucket rim. Someone beats a washboard with 2 spoons. Stars park above the roof. He lay on. Coyotes speak beyond the ridge. The dogs lift their heads and settle again, certain of the circle. Luna creeps closer to the fire, forehead wrinkled, intensely counting sparks. Rusty snores, the veteran finally letting others keep watch. The next morning, fence work. 2 teens who have never finished anything set posts, tamp gravel, pull wire, widen the gate, and tie it true. Energy bleeds into craft and returns as pride. At noon he hands them sandwiches and gives them the porch, where the wind writes on their faces. This is yours too, he says, meaning the fence and the feeling. Afternoon brings a frame for the bunkhouse bulletin board. Mariah prints releases and arrivals in careful letters. Jace hangs a neat list of repair requests and writes his name under 2. Donations become system. Boots line the bunks. Sheet goods turn into shelves. Screws shine in frames that refuse to wobble. Elias writes thank you notes in his hand, having learned patience from joints, and mails photographs showing gifts at work. He always asks for time rather than money. An hour reading aloud, a Saturday teaching clamps, a Sunday fixing a bike in the shade, while 3 kids watch and learn. On a clear afternoon, he carries a ladder to the cedar posts at the gate. Teens gather with hardware and hope. He lifts a new sign from the porch, maple planed and oiled, edges eased, letters burned carefully. Rusty shifts into a supervisory crouch. Luna sits, tail sweeping dust. He hangs the sign on a black chain and steps down. Wind moves through leaves. Up the valley, a train lays a low, companionable note. Someone claps, then everyone claps, then cheering arrives the way summer rain does. Sudden, generous, bright. In the lantern's circle, the words show like a vow finally spoken. Carter's Haven, peace for all. Before supper he walks to the creek, with Luna while Rusty keeps the warm step. Water writes its old sentence over stone. He sees on the surface a face made of boy, keeper, teacher, all in one. He thinks of the tin with the wrinkled bill, folded like a fossil, understands it as a lesson rather than a wound, and leaves it where it belongs, in a box labeled start. Loss brought him here, work kept him, community widened the circle. Now porch, shop, bunkhouse, garden and clinic, hum even when nobody sings. Night wraps the ridge, the fire circle brightens, bread with apple butter passes hand to hand, stew warms bowls and talks. Elias raises the whistle, plays a short grace, then speaks plainly. If a day once convinced you nothing good could be built from what you had, look around. We made this by small exact choices, held long enough to add up. He points at benches, frames, crates of seedlings, and pens where healing moves. Tell the world how you turned a crack into a beam, a scar into a skill, a hard season into a hope. Luna puts a paw on his boot. Rusty sighs, trusting the circle to hold. Elias squeezes the old dog's shoulder and reads aloud the words on the gate. The flame lifts, as if agreeing. One by one, voices answer, with sentences that do not flinch. The cabin listens without drafts. The sky leans close. If you are reading this with a story that refuses to behave, bring it here for a minute. even if here is only the space between your hands. Remember the tool, the hand, the sentence, the tune, or the dog that nudged you toward steadier ground. Share it where others can reach it, then tell what you built after the worst day passed. Pass forward a map, a method, what happens next will shock you, not because spectacle explodes, but because stubborn kindness, repeated outshouts everything else. Lives change here. Tell yours and help the next one change too.